Welcome to a painting demonstration where we will be exploring the Zorn palette, using the Zorn palette to create a full color painting. And the Zorn palette is, of course, famously he used gold ochre, vermilion, and ivory black. We'll be using gold ochre, pyrrole red, and ivory black in this demonstration, but close enough, right? And any color in there is going to work well for this. But what I really want to show you in this demonstration isn't just how you can mix color using the Zorn palette, but I also want to show you how you can create form, how light interacts with any form using color. And since we only have 3 colors on our palette, I think it's going to be a much easier time to really zero in on that color or zero in on showing form with that color. That's what's coming up next. Before I dive into the art of showing form using color, I want to talk a little bit more about Zorn. I want to talk about his work in a couple of paintings and just show you quickly here a little tour of all the vivid color. I use vivid there usually, the richness that you can get into a Zorn palette painting. So let's start off with this one, Portrait by Zorn. And here, I think this is really kind of at first thought, this is what you maybe would expect out of the Zorn palette. It's very gray, right? There isn't very much color here, but it obviously works well for a Caucasian, you know, fair person in North daylight with a dark dress and a dark background, right? You don't need very much color to show a scene like this, and so he's handily capturing it here with the Zorn color palette. But what if you have something that has a little bit more color in it, right? And this just gorgeous painting here, still with the Zorn palette. This is where I want to start pulling off a few of these different colors to show you where they would land and maybe how you could mix them. So if we were to take the red, I think the red makes a lot of sense, just right in here. That's sort of right between the yellow ochre and the pyrrole red, gold ochre and the pyrrole red. So it's just a slightly orange with some white in it. That's what we're seeing there. This green dress, at its greenest, is right in here, a mixture between gold ochre and ivory black. And make sure I have it all the way here. And those are really the strongest colors. All the rest are these yellows, which are going to be somewhere with that gold ochre and white, and then really just grays and darks and beiges. But you can see by having the gold ochre and the ivory black mixed together, and then right near that, and also in your headband, the gold ochre and the pyrrole red mixed together, you get a really beautiful color contrast there. But you can get even more color with this palette. Let me show you this one. Okay, so here you can see he has a lamplight from the left that looks like some sort of cool light coming from the window to the right. And you can just see just a wonderful richness to that color. I mean, look at that. Look at how, I guess, just full this color spectrum seems. That cool light and the warm light, that split light, that's what it's called, but the oranges and the violets, it's just gorgeous, and it's typical Zorn. He's just wonderful. So let's back up and start looking at this and comparing some of these colors to the color wheel. So the first thing that I want to show you is that these oranges are easily captured by pyrrole and gold ochre. You know, just as strong as they are, none of them are outside of that range. You can get all of that rich color. And what we're seeing here on the violet side, these are actually not violets, probably just ivory black and white mixed together. Yeah, maybe a little bit of red. So yeah, it's right in here. But look at that. This violety looking color right next to her head, right? So if I just put that in isolation over here, look at that. It doesn't look anything like violet, right? But the thing that makes it feel like it could be violet is putting it with that color, right? And surrounding it, of course, it's surrounded by yellows and oranges, and so it starts to make it look very cool. This right here could be the only exception. I don't know if there's a little tiny bit of another blue in there or if that's just the way it's showing up in this recording. But that's the only thing I see in here that you couldn't easily have mixed with this ivory black. And most of these ivory blacks, it's ivory black and white. Ivory black and white and red that are giving us these violets. But this is something that's going to come out in the demonstration painting that I'm about to create for you here after this bonus material. The reason these cool grays look like blue, gray, violet is because of all the oranges, right? Those are the tones that make it the the gray wants to assume the color complement, and so that's what we have here. We have all this rich warmth making the cools look very cool, and then that distance in the spectrum between the cool gray and the saturated orange makes it feel like a broadly colored painting. And really here, we're just seeing a gorgeous handling of the Zorn palette. Now that I've shown you some colors that you can mix with the Zorn palette, looking at Zorn's paintings, I'd like to zero in on this painting and talk a little bit more about showing form with color. This is going to be showing form with color and value. And the first thing I want to do, because I feel like this rimlit interior scene is similar to the rimlit interior scene in our subject, I think this is going to be a good example here. So let's just pull out a flesh tone. And I'm just going to paint that flesh tone into this sphere. Okay, so there's our flesh tone. And now I need to see some of that direct light, right? So that rim light, this is the direct light. So I've basically got the shadow there, and then this is going to be the direct light coming right in like that. And I'm actually going to do that. There we go. And maybe just a little bit lighter right in here. So here we have really just two now. We have the light and we have the shadow. And those are just pulled directly from here. I'm not using color yet. I'm only using value. But let's start talking about color and using color to show form. Look at how he grays off some of these planes that are facing more directly up toward the light. So there's some cool cast light coming down onto her forehead, onto the top of her hair, of course, but right on her lip there, I can see just a cooler color in there, and right in here as well. So I'm just going to take that cooler color I can see on her lip, I'm just going to bring it across right there. And that's going to help right away to get that feeling of form. And it also, just full disclosure, because it's a little bit darker, it helps to show that value change is the reflected light of the core as well. Okay, but then on the planes that are facing down towards the bench and her jacket and her her collar in here, it's getting a little bit more yellow, right? So let's bring in just that slightly more yellow color in here. These are the forms that are facing down. And you can see how round that starts to look. And then, of course, there are lots of other little colors, her cheeks, her mouth. There's more detail in there. But those colors from the cool right in here to the warmer yellow down below, that's really going a long way to showing the form here. Okay, so that's a sphere to show quickly what you can expect. Yeah, and just look at how three-dimensional that looks. There's value in play, but there's color too, from that cooler gray to that yellow in the shadow, and you can feel the roundness of that sphere. Let me create you another sphere just looking at this sheet, because this is form principle. Zorn is applying it to his painting. Let's apply it to our source before we start. Okay, just like before, I am going to take just the basic shadow gray. I've got some shadowy grays in here. It's actually going to be pretty close to the gray of the background. So let me just make it a little bit darker. There we go. So there's our shadow. And let's paint in the light. Of course, here in the light, we have a different direction. It's not coming from the same direction as the other one. It's really up high and very subtle. It's not wrapping around very much. Sort of almost a crescent moon of light on this form. Okay, so there is just a very basic light and shadow. And we can go maybe a little bit lighter, just a little bit more of a highlight in here. Just go all the way up to white, just to really round out what we're talking about in the reflected light, or I'm sorry, in the highlight, in the direct light. So there's our direct light, and then our shadow. Now let's start talking about some of the reflected light within the shadow. And this is where it gets really fun. So starting with the blue, let's just bring the blue in. Why is this blue? Why would there be blue right here? Well, the blue is here because there's sky coming in, and into that into that shadow, the blue reflected light is definitely going to show up, right? And notice that right on the transition, it's kind of right in there. There's going to be a slightly darker bit right between. I'm just going to trace out where that would go right in here. Okay, so there's our slightly darker shadow. Cool. Planes facing up. There we go. Okay, so here we have direct light, core shadow, and then I'm showing you the reflected cool. How do we show the same thing we saw on this sphere up here and to the right? How do we show that that sphere is wrapping around down? How do we show the roundness, the volume of it? Well, it's by finding these worms. And these worms they are just going to do the trick. See, watch. Just going to start bringing in that warmth. Where's that warmth coming from? Well, just like the sky is reflecting into the part of the sphere that faces up towards the sky is going to be in the, it's going to be influenced by the blue sky up above. The same thing is going to happen with the bottom of the sphere facing down towards all that warm reflected light that's happening on the ground that's reflecting back up into it. So I'm actually putting a little bit more in there so we can really see that. So we see that light breaking over, and then the blues reflecting from the sky and the oranges reflecting from the ground. So if you can think of the journey of light, the journey of light is that it comes and illuminates as much of a form as it can, right? And then passes around and does not influence the shadow. It is not in the shadow, and then passes by it, right? And there's a little shadow cast. Then it bounces off all the planes and back like splashing water, like water down a waterfall, back into the underside of the plane. That's what's happening in the Zorn painting down here. That's what's happening in our sheep source. The more you apply this to your painting, the more realistic your paintings will look. So I actually want to take this and try to make it more the shape of a sheep here. You can see it happening in a couple of different places. Okay, and just stretch it out a little bit more, right? Um, bear with me. I know this is kind of clunky, but try to squeeze a sheep shape out of this thing. Okay, here we go. And there it is. Bring in another one. This can be the eye socket, right? And I know the eye socket isn't showing quite as much, but it's gonna be pretty close like that. You can see these forms repeating, right? Form principle. Here's the ear, right? The ear is kind of, it's a squished shape by comparison. We'll bring it in here. In theory, that ear is going to be doing something like that, right? And you can see those forms then repeating over and over and over again in this scene. Direct light, but then once you've passed by the direct light and the direct light has done its big job with the shadow to show where the light is coming from, you show form inside the shadow using reflected light and all those little value and color transitions, but I'm particularly focusing on color. Let's lose the value for just a second, or lose the color, and you're just going to see how close this all looks. Let's see. Let's select the right one here. There we go. So you can still see the form, but not nearly as well as you can with that color also showing the form. So that's just a little taste of what we're going to get into in the next 2 hours here with this painting of a sheep using the Zorn palette.